everybody, and welcome back to MFA Writers. I'm so happy to have you here and excited to share a conversation I had with my friend, Caylin Capra-Thomas, who recently graduated from the Creative Writing PhD program at the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. Before we get to the interview, I just wanted to let you all know that the University of Missouri is not only where I got my undergrad degree back in the day, but it's also where I currently work, though I teach outside the English department, which will be the focus of today's interview. I hope you find the conversation as enjoyable and informative as I did. You can find MFA Writers on Instagram and Twitter, as well as mfawriters.com. We love to hear from listeners, so feel free to shoot us a direct message on one of those platforms, or an email at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. And if you have a minute to rate or review the show, the best place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. Doing so will help boost our podcast as we try to boost these amazing writers. Also, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, you can apply at mfawriters.com. On that same website, you can also click the support button to support us financially, if it's within your means. Or you can do so by going directly to buymeacoffee.com/mfawriters. Finally, as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Caylin Capra-Thomas. Caylin is the author of the poetry collection Iguana Iguana, and her poetry and essays have appeared in Georgia Review, Pleiades, Long Reads, 32 Poems, New England Review, and elsewhere. Her scholarship has appeared in the T.S. Eliot Studies Annual. The recipient of fellowships from the Vermont Studio Center and the Suwannee Writers Conference, she earned an MFA in Creative Writing Poetry from the University of Montana and a PhD in English and Creative Writing Nonfiction from the University of Missouri in Columbia. She now teaches English and Creative Writing at Stevens College. Today, Caylin has brought 3 poems to read for us.
The first poem I'll read is from my book, Iguana Iguana. It's called Supermassive. I stood at the sink and became a few minutes older. Alive, before that moment, alive through the dishes, then I just kept on with it. Left the wet sponge weeping soap into the drain. I sent Emma a message with a picture of my face smushed up, 8 grapes, and thought about the 3 possible fates of the universe. Expand forever but slowly, or expand until collapse. All of that sounded all right. Anyway, what could I do about it? In close-ups, I think the sun's surface looks like a flamin' hot Cheeto. Lately, I feel only hungry and fine and light years away from myself. The next poem that I have for you is from a collection in progress called Singular Creatures, and they're all poems in the voices of different creatures of myth and folklore and cryptid, stuff like that. So this one is for spooky season. The brides of Dracula file for divorce. Dinner talk's grown butter knife dull. Type O or type B. Pass me the wriggling child. Not even a please. Brutish. Not for your hunger, we too must eat, but for the narcissus bloom where your heartless heart can't beat. Husband unchurched, blood groom drugging the wedding wine, burgundy blubbering up, thoracic, how do we undrink you? Wretch, wretched saint, demons don't live without gods, but which should we blame for what your desire has wrought? Do we deem it that desire, or is this too soft? You, who never love, you, who has never loved. Unbridle us, unbride. We'd rather be dust than wives. And the third poem is called Search History Sad. And in the age of AI, it is feeling like a preemptive elegy for the Google search. Um, I feel like a log of somebody's AI chat history is going to be both, I don't know, more depressing and less interesting. um, okay, search history sad. Do whales have a concept of death? Sad. Baking with applesauce? Sad. How many towns in Massachusetts? How many towns in California, Vermont, Rhode Island? Sad. Hip flexor pain? Sad. Rotator cuff pain? How many towns in Mass? Difference between a city and a town. Define druthers? Sad. Define bourgeois? Sad. SI joint pain? Sad. Define nugatory. Do bats have a concept of death? Do whales sleep? Sad. Whale vocabulary, bat words, bat sleep, Motel 6, San Diego North bedbugs, La Quinta Inn, San Diego bedbugs, old man skull long hair wig. Synonyms pang, synonyms anxiety, garlic sweats, signs of the flu. Stardew Valley fan art sad, banged my knee, whole leg hurts. Synonyms haunted, synonyms meaningful, body changes after 30 sad, get rid of hiccups. Word for divine loneliness, what is grace? Crispy home fries fast, sad, time immemorial sad, fluffy chihuahuas. First person or first dash person. Nutmeg secrets. Nutmeg jam, where am I? What is the address of where I am now? Zoodles too watery sad, what does a portal sound like? Do rivers get deeper over time? How to be happy, sad, what do I need, sad, do rivers get deeper over time? How many towns in New England, sad, do rivers change size, change course over time? Do rivers deepen? Will I deepen? How much can I know? How much knowledge can I hold? Can I hold it while running, flowing, while getting carried away? Am I getting carried away? Do rivers get deeper over time, wider, faster? Define shore, define cock and float. Can I cross? Will I make it? Can I carry myself away?
Caylin, that was awesome. You and I have known each other for a little while, and I'm really excited to get the chance to chat with you. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So one thing that always sticks out to me when I read your poetry, but even more so when I hear you read your poetry, is how successfully you use humor in your work, which I think is not an easy thing to pull off. I think a lot of writers and people in general, either intentionally or unintentionally, use humor as a sort of armor to avoid opening up in some way. But the humor in your work always makes me feel like you're pulling the reader closer, like closer to your actual voice and personality, and closer to some truth about the world, at least how you see it. So, how do you think about humor and how best to use it in your work?
Yeah, it's a good question because I don't know if I actually consciously think about the humor as I'm creating the work. I think that humor is my personal baseline form of processing experience and information. Poets and humorists are really paying a lot of attention to those little eccentricities of daily life. And if you're already attuned to incongruity, something that's askew or to the left of expectation, you start to kind of see whatever that expectation was in a new light. Um, and so paying attention to what makes you laugh can lead you to a kind of truth. And so I hear what you're saying in terms of humor as armor. I think that, particularly like millennials having come through the hipster age of ultra irony, it's definitely a potential pitfall. But I do think that if you're using it because it has appeared to you organically and because it's a form of attention, if it's a way that you pay attention, then I think that it actually can lead you closer to something like truth. I mean, like there are many roads that lead to truth, but I don't know. I think the funny one has the best views, and I think that it's the ride that people prefer. I think that I don't know, I'll always remember the funny thing over the dry stuff that I forced myself to consume for the sake of being a learned person.
Yeah, right.
Um, yeah.
So, how does humor and jokes play into your writing process? Like when you're coming up with an idea for a poem, do jokes play any role in that part of your writing process?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of times I guess sometimes they're jokes, sometimes it's just, here's a funny thing, or like, here's something in the world that presented itself to me as funny. Here's something that made me laugh. And, a lot of times because I'm a writer, because I'm a poet, that thing is language based. And a lot of times it winds up being the title. And for me, I know titles are something that a lot of people struggle with, or sometimes they're kind of an afterthought. But I often start with the title, which I don't know. I feel like that makes me sound like the person who eats the ears on the Easter Bunny first, but the chocolate Easter Bunny,
Yeah.
or it's like organizing an outfit around the hat you're going to wear. And I don't know. I love a good hat, so yeah, a lot of times that funny thing will just kind of appear to me in all caps, and I'm like, ooh, I got to work with that one. Um, that happens just as often in writing nonfiction as it does with poetry. And I will tell you that pulling it off on the prose level is a lot harder. But, for example, I just had an essay in long reads called On the Sublime, but the is in parentheses because it's an essay that's about the Sublime, and it's also about the 90s ska punk surf band Sublime. So that occurred to me. And so, yeah, it's basically something strikes me as funny. I muse on whether or not it's possible to get something actually meaningful from something that was just a funny little thought to me one day. And then I really dig my heels in and stubbornly make myself do it.
And one thing you told me before the interview, you described yourself as a writer who toes the line between cynicism and optimism, and between being whimsical and being pragmatic, and between seeking and refusing transcendence. And when I hear this, I hear a writer who seems to be looking for inspiration or finding inspiration in the space between things, in the space between easy answers, in the space between dichotomies. So, how important is it to your writing to situate yourself in that kind of in between space and like write into that discomfort in some ways?
Yeah, I think it's essential. Everything is terrible, and everything is and everything is terribly funny and terribly beautiful, and um, we contain multitudes and all of that jazz. Um, okay, so I'm gonna I'm gonna go with an astrology angle first.
Okay.
Um, apologies. I'm a Scorpio. I have a Taurus moon, and those two are opposite from one another on the wheel. Um, I also have a Mercury in Libra, which makes me kind of insufferably diplomatic. Like I'm always trying to see things from every possible angle. That is also where I can kind of, get lost in the sauce when I'm writing, like especially nonfiction. I follow these questions and curiosities down into research rabbit holes from which I sometimes never emerge. I think in alternate universes, I have like died in several like EBSCO sessions. um, I guess I'm really bored by one note takes or representations. There is a complex history and present to every single particle of this planet. And that's really inconvenient and uncomfortable. And it requires a lot of work to wrap your head around. And I'm very fearful that our, like soundbite culture is careening pretty wildly towards this really flat space where nobody is interested in complexity, or if they're interested in it, they don't have the attention span for it, or if they have the attention span for it, they don't have the time for it because everybody's just like grinding themselves into nothing to survive. Um, and the many facets of any particular subject is not only kind of compelling to me, but I think that it's essential to maintain my own interest and essential to something being worth writing to me. And I think it's also kind of, a writer's responsibility to engage with the complexity of their subject. Yeah. So, like, I'm a cynical optimist, an optimistic cynic. I really do kind of find myself drawn towards whatever the bright side of anything is, while also maintaining a kind of unbearable awareness of whatever of it is not so bright or shiny.
Yeah. I teach a research class. And so I talk with my students a lot about developing a good research question. And I say the best research questions don't really have answers. They're like almost impossible to answer.
Yeah.
Because the instinct of most students is to come up with a research question that they think will be easy to answer. But
Right.
what's interesting about that? There's nothing interesting about that. And
Yeah.
I think creative writers can learn something from that too. I think the best work comes from writing into a space that feels impossible to answer in an easy way.
Because that's the most fun part about it, right? Is exploring all those possibilities. There are so very few um, absolute answers in this world and in this life, and so if you need them, maybe you should study math. Although I think that there are probably also mathematical equations, and like I'm clearly not a math person, but yeah. So basically, you either have to learn to love the questions or just be a very miserable person, which is, I am quoting myself, and it came easily to me because I did write that down once. And I have been like in the last, minute and a half talking through this question. I'm like, the easiest thing to say would just be that thing that I wrote in that essay, but I'm not going to quote myself. But then I was like, ultimately, that is the easiest thing to say. You learn to love the questions or you're miserable.
I also want to talk about your academic journey. You have kind of been all over the country in pursuit of creative writing. You're from Massachusetts. You went to Montana for your MFA, and now you live right in the middle of the country after finishing your PhD at the University of Missouri, here in Columbia, Missouri, where I also live. So each of those are big moves, and I imagine it wasn't easy to uproot your life for any of them. So looking back, how do you think about those moves, however difficult at the time? How do you think they aided in your development as a writer?
Well, I think my poetry collection, Iguana Iguana, a lot of that is kind of about all of those different places where I found myself or lost myself over the course of like 7 years. I think I moved between 2010 to 2020. I don't know. I think I moved like 8 times from Vermont to France to Massachusetts to Rhode Island to Montana to Florida to from Florida to Ohio to California to Missouri. So that was like I missed a few. There were some where it was like less than a year and I blank on it. And some of those moves were for opportunities. Some of those moves were just restlessness. Florida was just kind of wanting to go somewhere else. And then not liking where I went. And so going somewhere else again. But, this geographic questing, I think is, a larger form of the writer's quest. I was looking for something, and I never quite found it unless it just is the knowledge that the search itself is what you're looking for. I don't know. I feel like I should be, wearing a tie-dye t-shirt when I say that. Um, there was a psychic once who told me in a past life I was a wizard who, she was like, yeah, I can see you. You're like, you're at your workbench. You've got a skull on the table. I was like loving the sound of this already. Um, and she was like, your wizard can time travel. And he says, there is nothing left to discover, but you know that already. And I was like, huh, thank you, past life wizard. I will hold on to that. But, um, Yeah, I think in the same way that I'm interested in the space between dichotomy, I'm also kind of interested in those never-ending kind of like thought loops that just bring you back to the same place over and over, but you're compelled again and again to depart from the place where you've arrived. Um, so, yeah, I think that, you know, I'm always kind of questing in whatever it is that I write. Half the time, it's just to figure out what am I actually thinking right now? And then I write some poem where I get to the end and I'm like, I guess it was that. What does that mean? But um, yeah, I think the moving was itself a search. And when I turned those years into a book, I realized that a lot of my writing is also a search. And so, the search is important not because of what you want to find, but because of what you wind up finding, which is never, those two things are never the same.
Right. I traveled a lot in my 20s. I spent a lot of time abroad, and there's something so magical about traveling and having the ability essentially to learn something new just by stepping outside your door. There's just something new to learn every single day by just
Yeah.
walking around, by just moving through the world and asking questions and
Yeah.
not accepting easy answers. And I think I'm also searching for that same thing when I write, when I'm working on fiction. I'm searching for that same feeling of discovery I had when I was traveling and walking
hmm
out into the world and being surprised by it.
That's the best part of writing. That's what makes it feel good when it feels good is that you actually, like, you are not in control. You have no idea what's around the next corner. Um, and you're just excited to see what's coming up. Like the thing is in charge. The poem is in charge, the story's in charge, and you're kind of um I mean, sometimes when it's good, it feels like channeling, or a high wire act where you have no idea how you haven't fallen yet. And that's the position of a writer, that's the position of a learner, right? Like, I think people confuse learning with knowledge. Um, they expect a class to be a place where you are tested on what you know, and, half the time it's a space where the professor themselves is somebody who is hoping with the class to contribute to a body of knowledge, to create a body of knowledge from the minds that have shown up. Um, and so, I think it's really important, particularly if you work in a classroom, to be able to shift that perception of what education is. Like,
Yeah.
it's not a place for knowing, it's a place for learning, and that's something that everyone in the room is doing.
Okay, so you mentioned all of those 20 maybe different places that you've lived in your life.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the most recent one,
Yes.
most recent stop on your academic journey. You attended and recently graduated from the PhD in English with a creative writing emphasis from the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. It's a 5-year, fully funded program in which students can specialize in poetry, fiction, creative nonfiction, or any combination of the genres. Before we get into the specifics of the program, I want to hear about your decision to pursue a PhD. 10 years passed between when you earned your MFA and when you earned your PhD. So, what made you want to go back after all that time?
Well, I decided I wanted to teach. I committed to that basically because, the MFA, it's supposed to be the terminal degree for creative writers. And I guess it just kind of took me a little while to stop being angry that somebody had decided um, to foil that basically. And so I finished my MFA in Montana in 2015. And I wasn't sure if I was going to teach because coming to the end of the MFA, I feel like I had a clearer understanding of the state of the academic job market, and that was scary to me. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just do some other stuff, see how that goes. And I stuck around Montana for a year. My now husband was a year behind me in the program, and so he was finishing up his MFA. And then we moved to Florida for a year and change, and I did wind up doing some teaching in Florida. I was adjuncting at a community college, and then from 2018 to 2020, I wound up teaching at a school in the San Jacinto Mountains called Idlewild Arts Academy, which is actually an arts boarding high school. And it was a unique opportunity because I was able to, I was working with high schoolers, but I was teaching all creative writing classes, creative writing and like literature for writers. And so I had a lot of autonomy in terms of what I taught and how I taught it. The students that I worked with were just like preternaturally talented. I still think of a lot of them as some of the most talented writers that I've worked with, including like grown-ups that I had in my graduate programs, Um, and, while they certainly cannot stand as the model of everyone you're ever going to work with, in teaching creative writing, that's when it sort of set in. I was like, all right, this is what I want to do. And I also knew that if I wanted to teach in higher ed, which my desire to teach creative writing sort of necessitated, I would have to get a PhD because that I think is the ultimate reason why one would go for a PhD after an MFA. Because again, although it's supposed to be the terminal degree, now that the creative writing PhD exists, it does feel like, in a really, really crowded academic job market, that's a major piece of what can get you a job in that field.
So, as I mentioned, Mizzou's program allows for specialization in poetry, fiction, or creative nonfiction, but according to the website, students are expected to take courses in more than one area. What do you think are the benefits of working across genres like that?
So many. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this wasn't the case when I was in coursework, but I think that Mizzou has since moved to an ageneric workshop model. So you can kind of be writing in any genre that you want in. And so they're like topical workshops. Um, so I guess the main reason, not the main reason, but a big reason as to why I selected Mizzou when I was in my decision-making process, both in terms of application and acceptance, was their emphasis on multi-genre writing. The fact that they had an application option where you could specify like multi-genre and send a sample that included both, that was really big to me. There were some programs that were like, yeah, you can apply in two genres, but they're separate applications and we're taking a second application fee. um, and, I think that writing in longer forms for poets is something that can give you additional tools and strategies for poem making. You know, uh, an understanding of narrative technique can certainly be applicable in poems. I research a lot when I write poetry. That's one of my preferred methods of procrastination and inspiration, and those two things can be the same thing. And I also think that prose writers have a lot to learn from poets. The attention to language at the molecular level. Um, Maurice Carlos Ruffin was at Sewanee when I was there, and I think I said something to him about how I was like, "Oh man, I love reading fiction. I love reading novels, but I don't think I could write one because I don't get plot. Like I don't know how to do it." And he was like, "Plot is anything. Like we're having this conversation. That's plot." And I was like, "What?" And then he said, "You're a poet. Poets are queens on the chessboard. Once you have the command of language at the level of the word, at the level of the phrase, the line, you can move anywhere on the chessboard. You can go anywhere from there." And so, the institutional tendency to categorize people into their specialties and specializations and their genres is kind of an enforcement of this really like unnecessary boundary. I think it probably really only exists for the sake of like course scheduling and hiring, maybe, where it's like, oh, well, here is our modernist and here is our poet. And, the poet's going to teach the poetry classes and the modernist is going to teach the modernism classes. But, people can be and do and be interested in many things. And the multi-genre aspect at Mizzou was certainly a pull for me, a big part of why I wound up going there.
All right. So for listeners who don't know, PhD programs usually involve coursework in the first couple of years of the program, followed by a year or two focused on comprehensive exams, and another year or two focused on writing the dissertation. I believe that's the way the Mizzou program is set up. So I wanted to ask you about the differences between the MFA and PhD and how listeners should think about those two if they're considering one or the other, but in particular, the comprehensive exams, which are not a thing in MFA programs. So what were those like?
Oy. Well, comprehensive exams is the experience that led me to finally pursue my ADHD diagnosis because I was floundering. And I was sort of in a weird position that, my first advisor left at the end of the semester that I selected her for my advisor. And then that summer, my book came out. And so basically, I didn't have oversight or anyone kind of checking in on me during that time. And so, when the cat's away, the mice will self-sabotage. And I just did everything else except read for my exams. And so, tying into the conversation of how I lost the thread during comprehensive exams is the fact that it is a very self-structured process. And I think that is a huge part of the difference between the MFA and the PhD. I thought that to know something, you had to take a class about it. I thought that still when I arrived in the PhD program is the place where I learned that a class is only ever a door or a window into a room that has like no floor. But you're only in coursework for the first like year and a half, 2 years. And then what? You've got 3 years left of the program, and you're kind of after that, it's all you. Nobody's telling you what papers to write or even giving you like a menu of options, right? Like there's no subject that somebody else gives to you. Like you are choosing everything. You are creating, for example, comprehensive exams, like, you can get input, you can get advice, but ultimately you are the one who is creating that list. You're the one who's reading that list. You're the one who's making something out of that list. Yeah, I mean, like it's a huge self-structured project. It is amorphous. It's constantly evolving. It's honestly pretty good training for a large scale writing project, whether it's critical or creative, because again, you go into something like this with an expectation of where you're going to come out, and you never come out that door. You're always like somehow emerging from the chimney. Um, and it's difficult and it's frustrating while it's happening. And if you've got some executive dysfunction and nobody checking on you and no deadlines, then it can all unravel pretty quickly. But I think I get why they do it. Um, and then you go on to your next large self-structured project, which is the dissertation. Um, I mean, I guess it was an experience that taught me how to ask for what I needed from a mentor, right? So after my advisor left, Francis Dickey and Gabe Freed were like co-chairs of my committee. And at some point, Francis was like, "Hey, do you want to meet to talk about your comprehensive exams?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I would love to meet." And then when we met, she was like, "Okay, do you want to say we'll meet like every other week?" And I was like, "Yes, that'd be very helpful." And then next meeting, she was like, "Do you want to say you'll have, specific things read by every meeting?" And I was like, "Yes, thank you." And now I know that I need that. I need accountability. I need deadlines. I need some external structure to pull something like that off. Yeah, so like the MFA, it's a lot of coursework, it's a lot of workshop, and for that reason, it's like I think it tends to be really fun. Like you're in classes with cool people who are into the same stuff as you and having great conversations. But that part of the PhD ends like not even halfway through. So after that, you're kind of living the life of a scholar. You're pursuing your own intellectual interests with some support. You need to learn how to ask for more if you need more, and it's a lot of big amorphous self-structured work.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that we talk about a lot, but I think one of the main things that you learn in a program in grad school, whether it's an MFA or a PhD, is what you need to do in order to create on your own, to be self-structured and to do large projects, whether that is scholarly work or creative work on your own. So it's great, even though it might have been frustrating and difficult and very, very stressful at times. It's great that you came out the other end feeling like you knew what you needed to be successful in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I came out the chimney covered in soot, but I, um, yeah, I definitely came out the other side having a stronger sense of what I need to succeed and how to do things in a way that is not totally stressful every time.
Right, right. Well, you mentioned teaching as something that you were doing throughout the program. I do want to talk about that at least a little bit, teaching and funding, because those are important things to think about for anyone who's considering the program. The PhD at Mizzou is fully funded, and that is through teaching assistantships. That's my understanding. According to the website, students get to teach creative writing courses. So, what was that experience like? What classes did you get to teach, and what was the workload while you were in the program?
So it was 2 classes a semester. There is a fellowship you can apply to that gives you a course release in your final year. My MFA, we only taught 1 class per semester. I don't know what other programs are like, but I think that that was pretty manageable for me then, particularly for someone who is kind of learning how to be a higher ed instructor. Um, in the PhD, you're expected to kind of be able to manage a higher load. And, there were definitely moments when I was like pretty, pretty burned out. And then I was like, at an R1 school, most faculty are actually teaching a 2-2 load as well. So we were actually teaching the same number of classes as our, faculty advisors. And so, yeah, I mean, it was more teaching, but again, if you're doing the PhD because you want to be in academia, like you are going to be learning how to balance your personal, creative, and intellectual pursuits with that obligation, that responsibility. Um, and that's also why I was there. I love to teach. So everyone's got to teach comp. So the first semester I taught 2 sections of first year writing, but I was teaching intro to poetry by my second semester in the first year. Um, I think I was in a pretty unique position. I started the PhD in 2020, and because of that and because of like the financial uncertainty that COVID wrought on institutions, Mizzou didn't take an incoming class for the 2021-2022 school year. And so that just meant there were fewer graduate students for the duration of my time there to teach classes. And so I got to teach like kind of a lot of creative writing classes. It was pretty good. So I taught intro to poetry twice, I believe. I taught intro to nonfiction twice. I taught intermediate poetry once, intermediate nonfiction once. And then I taught, by the end of my time there, they were offering like a multi-genre intro to creative writing class, and I taught that twice. But yeah, you can also like propose lit classes, and you can experiment with how you run that class. And so, um, for example, the intermediate poetry class that I taught there, I did as a docu-poetry class. Um, so half of what I taught was creative writing. And I don't know if that's still the case given the fact that they're now taking, regular sized cohorts again, but you do have the opportunity uh, to teach creative writing workshops. You have the opportunity to teach different levels of creative writing workshops, and you have the opportunity to teach literature.
And what's the funding like? How much is the stipend? Does it come with health insurance, things like that?
Yeah. So when I started, it was 18,000 a year. By the time I left, it had gone up to 20. You have the option to have your stipend distributed over 12 months, which is really nice. And it does have health insurance. Yes. So that is also huge.
And I live in Columbia, Missouri too, so I know the cost of living's pretty low here. I imagine 20 grand a year, although it's not a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's probably enough to get by year to year here in Columbia.
Yeah, for sure. And then, like some folks picked up work other places once they were done with coursework or their comps. Like I know some people who would adjunct classes at other schools in addition to Mizzou. Yeah, so people found the time to also put that into their schedule. I don't think I was capable of that, but yeah, I managed. And I'm married, so I was splitting costs in a very affordable town. Even if my rent goes up $50 a month every year, it has. Even if costs are rising, it's still a very affordable place, a very affordable pocket of the country.
All right. One last question before we wrap up. Same question I ask everybody I have on the show. So, what is one way in which the PhD experience in your case was different, for better or for worse, from your expectations when applying?
I think I didn't totally know. I don't think I knew what I was getting into. Um, uh, I wrote more and less than I expected to in the PhD. I did a lot more scholarship and scholarly work than I expected to because Mizzou's PhD, like everyone gets the same degree. It's all a degree in English. It's all a PhD in English. And so, I have the same qualification now as somebody who wrote a critical dissertation. And there is a critical component of the creative dissertations. It's like a critical introduction, supposed to be an article length piece of scholarship. But I think during coursework, even in workshops, boy, was it hard to find any time to write. It really wasn't until after comps, once I was in dissertation land, that I found the time to write a dissertation. And I did, I think I was constantly writing in the MFA. And I think that that's another reason why, for me, why I would sort of note to your listeners that the PhD is for academic scholarly professionalization. I think you can do great, fulfilling, soul enriching work in a PhD, but it is a grind. Um, it's an exercise in having your cognitive load split 6 ways to Sunday all the time. And I don't know if that was good for me or not, but that's what it was. And that's what I signed up for. So yeah, I would say it's definitely more scholarly. It's very rigorous. It's a time commitment. Um, and so, I think you have to have a very clear sense of what you want on the other side of it.
Well, Caylin, it's always nice chatting with you. I want listeners to definitely go to CaylinCapra-Thomas.com, read your poetry, read your essays, because I love all of them. Thanks so much for taking the time to come chat with me.
Thanks for having me.